So I'm going to ask the three panelists, so Kevin, Ethan and Patrick, just to come back so that we can see you. And you know, we have about 15 minutes or so for a conversation and to maybe tease out some of the issues that we have spoken about or you have spoken about through your presentations. And again, for anybody listening, to send in whatever questions you have, and I'll do my best to get to all of those. Kevin, you were just, because you finished last, I'll pick on you first. In terms of the role that, you know, an organisation like TSSG can play in terms of taking the pain out, because sometimes, you know, there's, as Patrick has said too, there's a lot of opportunity, European funding, a lot of activity in this space, but smaller companies in particular can often feel, you know, a little bit frightened, I suppose, by European funding, bureaucracy, paperwork and so on. Can you give us some sort of practicalities of what's involved in terms of the ask from smaller companies, we'll say in particular, that might want to get involved in some of these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. I'm in the middle of a project proposal at the moment with 57 different partners going in about 2 weeks' time, and it can be quite stressful. And typically in TSSG, we don't recommend SMEs and let's say smaller scale industries to join a project like that as a coordinator, because the coordination task is quite a mammoth undertaking for any organization. So what we try and do is we'll select the target areas we're going after under the work programs for Horizon 2020, and then we'll go out and try and find companies in the region and across Europe that may be interested in joining us in one of those proposals. And you know, once a company joins as a partner, their level of involvement could be as simple as, you know, okay, you fill in your administrative details, your phone number and all that kind of stuff on the European Commission portal. But then maybe writing a page of a profile of yourself as a company and why you would want to be in that EU project. So for example, the Demeter project proposal, at the end of the day, the whole proposal was about, I think, 750 pages long. But for an Irish entity wanting to participate, their input to that would have been a page.
Okay.
So that's why we, in terms of scale of work, that's why we take the pain out of it. And that's important for companies to know, because, you know, with anything on the EU side, it is a bit of a lottery at the end of the day. So TSSG and a lot of other RPOs in Ireland have a strong track record of coordinating these proposals, and we just make it easier for organizations to participate. So that's in terms of the larger scale projects. But then in terms of things like cascade funding, which I know Hazel is going to talk about. Like we have a number of projects like Smart Agri Hubs, AgRobo Food and Demeter, for example, which have reserved a certain amount of budget to be given out to organizations as a cascade fund. So essentially as mini projects. So we can help companies, if they're interested in leveraging some of that funding and taking some of the technologies out of these projects, they can come and talk to us, and we can explain to them what the project is actually looking for, what are the requirements, and how to fill in the forms. We can never guarantee the funding, but we can certainly point people in the right direction.
Very good. Okay. A question has come in from James Staines and asking, so I suppose any of the panel that would like to answer this, any views on how farmers as a group can benefit from their ag data? And is there merit in them forming a farmers co-op to aggregate data and perhaps then licensing it out? So looking at the value of data that's been generated on farms. Who'd like to take that easy question first?
Yeah, so maybe I'll come in here. I think it's an interesting consideration that James puts forward. And I think what we have to find the balance here is between this generation of data, how farmers can find a business model that allows them to take up technology, and maybe also take into account that, you know, the lifespan of the technology. Should every farmer own a piece of technology or license it out, or be able to just have it in a type of a model where they just use it as a service, and the owners of the technologies maybe take back that technology, update it, provide it back to the farmer. So, you know, your data could be some sort of trade versus the ability to use technology, but to be able to have it regularly updated, and that this isn't a cost to you. So some sort of outlook on where we try to limit what costs may be on the farmer. And I think, I think we need to consider why we want to aggregate the data and why it could be useful to someone else. It could be useful in terms of veterinary medical companies. They might want to know how you're using their product on the farm and how this may change your use practices, maybe in terms of fertilizers, maybe in terms of feed, where there could be some sort of movement of data that helps you benefit your practice and your income, and also has a bigger outlook on maybe what you may need to achieve in ag climatize. So I think not so much a rush to kind of try to aggregate the data and license it, but more how it can be traded maybe is an idea that I think could be worth.
There's another side to that as well, though. You can come at it from another angle as well, Patrick, that the more data that's shared from farms, the more intelligent the systems that support the farmers are going to become. So if more and more farmers and organizations feed their data into these systems, the systems can learn from what's going on across one farm to another and another, and start providing more like decision support and things like that to farmers based on best kind of practice. So there's not a financial benefit with that aspect, but there's certainly an advisory type benefit, I would say.
Very good. Okay, Ethan, just in terms of your report, you talked about access to support and training being critical. Where do you see the role of maybe ag education fitting into that? So, young farmers through ag college, universities, wherever they're getting, educated, into what you would have talked about in your report, an integrated approach to education. Maybe you might just give us some comments on how you feel that should work.
Yeah, so one of the findings we got was, farmers were open to the concept of a dedicated ag tech kind of provider or extension service, okay? But how can this be bundled into all stems or all steps of the education ladder? Because, we have to look at, how do we qualify stuff like recognition of prior learning, prior experience? How can this all be brought together in a way that it actually helps build up the motivation to get involved and to actually try and learn more and see how this technology works. So when we're talking about integrated, we're really talking about that no matter whether, how digitally capable you are, your digital experience, that where to go, that there's some place that you can go to start. And then there's a pathway the whole way through for you to actually kind of learn how to assess these technologies, not even understanding, what they are and, how they can be applied, but to be able to assess which technologies are the most appropriate for your localized situation, and then for your farm operation, maybe as a whole as well. So it's just trying to make it easier for, farmers and our members to understand, where do I go for what, and what's the pathway through for me then.
Okay, yeah, very good. There's some questions or queries coming in on actual examples, we'll say, maybe particularly for Kevin or Patrick, where there have been success stories with SMEs that have been involved in Horizon 2020 projects. Fair enough, some of these areas are quite new, but it helps sometimes in terms of encouraging companies to get involved, where they say, okay, there's a company I know, they invested time and resource in it and they have seen benefits. Do you have any examples, we'll say, where you would say that there was benefits to an Irish company through their involvement?
Do you want to take that, Patrick?
No, I'll let you start, Kevin, because
I'm not going to name individual companies because some of their work and involvement in projects. But first of all, engaging in Horizon 2020 projects, just purely from a financial point of view, it gives companies the ability to go down a research path that it may not be on their critical path, but they have funding. They can hire in people and researchers to actually develop their products in certain directions, and to engage with the best in Europe to trial those out in different kind of scenarios. I know within Demeter, for example, we're still at the early stages of the work. But we have, for example, farmers the people that own vineyards deploying new types of sensor technologies for pest management around vineyards and around olive growing, olive fields, I'm probably the wrong term as well. And, you know, they can, once they prove their technology within an EU project like this, they can take the further step then to commercialize it. And there's also, like, again, within Demeter, you know, anyone that's involved there that develops a technology will be putting that technology in front of like hundreds of farmers for them to actually try out. And there's a huge benefit to that as well in terms of validating that the technology is doing what organizations want.
Okay, Patrick, any comments on that?
Yeah, so like I think if we just look at the timelines, so agri-digitalisation from the EU and national side has really been picking up since about 2016. And there were companies that have come through the system, Mukol, etc., you know, and we know the success of HerdWatch and sort of ICBF activities, you know, where there has been successful application of digitalisation of information, and it's been presented to the farmers in clear and transparent and usable ways. But what we're going to probably see now over time is, say, through the Vista Milk project, the SFI Research Centre, where, you know, there was a big state investment and also a significant private sector investment of digitalisation products coming through. And then we're also going to see through this cascade funding in Horizon 2020 that Kevin and his colleagues are involved in a lot more activity. So without naming names, what we're probably on is the cusp of real development and real emergence of companies. But of course, there's going to be, it's not going to be an easy path, I think. There's going to be companies competing in the same spaces, and there's going to be also probably companies sort of being collateral damage, and they just can't quite succeed through that entrepreneurial path to find a space and niche in the market that allows them to develop further. So what I would say is, I think we need to watch this space.
Okay, and just in relation to that, Patrick, you mentioned in your presentation, you know, when I asked you about how Ireland performs internationally, and you said in terms of investment, research, funding and so on, that we're right up there, but maybe more needs to be done in terms of entrepreneurship or the actual realisation of some of that knowledge into, we'll say, tangible products or services and so on. How do we, you know, as a country, what needs to be done to foster that or to help that along? You know, what are the next steps, if you like, that need to take place, or, you know, where is the investment needed to help that process?
Yeah, so thanks, Karina. I think that's a very useful question for us at the moment. And I think, like, I mean, you guys in Enterprise Ireland are the experts on this, but entrepreneurship is a multi-factor matter. And so obviously we need the innovators, and we need the entrepreneurship and the investment from the Irish system to bring along these you know, high potential startups. We need access to finance that, you know, they can move through their different rounds of funding, and you know, not probably give away too much of their IP, and that the company can survive. We need them to link into the likes of the Vista Milk projects or the Smart Agri Hub activities or the Demeter projects, to be able to leverage the expertise and to not work in a vacuum. We need to create a sort of an innovation ecosystem where companies and researchers and farmers on the ground are sparking off each other, and the tacit knowledge of what the farmer knows on the ground for his own farm needs to be applied with the technology provider and the researcher, and this needs to melt together to really scale and develop. And the access to finance funds and the entrepreneurship funding that comes from Enterprise Ireland will be fundamental in this as well.
Sorry, Kevin. Karina, can I come in?
Yes, please.
No, I'll just say that there's a program down at NUI Galway, the Ag Innovation Program, which is brilliant, because it's applying the disciplined entrepreneurship model from Bill Owlett in MIT, and it's focused exactly on this situation around how to develop the entrepreneurial skills and align it really closely with the actual farmer need. So before you do anything, you actually understand what the challenges are that farmers are facing, and then, and only then, do you start conceptualizing a solution. So I think that type of approach is definitely what's required, as opposed to building a technology or taking a technology and looking for a solution within agriculture. You actually teach the empathy that's needed at the start to understand what the job to be done is. So it's an excellent program, and I think it's a great step forward.
Very good. Kevin, any comment on that?
Sorry, I was just typing an answer to someone else's question there.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship. In terms of fostering entrepreneurship, how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple things we can do. And I know Hazel and the team at TSSG are doing great work through PACE in terms of outreach to organisations to tell them what's going on in the research space. But I think we're still missing, Ireland is still missing the trick a little bit in terms of just trying to bring in more Irish entities into, let's say, EU funding programs and so on. And there isn't really one place where you can go to find out who in Ireland is targeting what, let's say, EU proposals. And I think it could be something, and I know Patrick and the guys in EI are doing their utmost to kind of push the message out across Ireland as well. But I think more interaction between the RPOs that are coordinating proposals, for example, the development advisors within Enterprise Ireland, would be very important, because we can have those companies join our project proposals and leverage the funding that comes out of them. So I think that some sort of even a national form of kind of who's doing what in terms of writing proposals to try and secure ag-tech funding would be very important. And then through that, we can bring along, new companies, startups, and so on as well. As long as you have a company registered on the Commission portal, you can participate in an EU project.
Okay, very good. A final sort of a broader question, because we're right up on 11, and I want to pass over to Seamus O'Mahony, our president of ASA, and also to introduce, Seamus might introduce our next chair, Dr. Aisling O'Neill from ARC Labs in Waterford. But the EU Farm to Fork strategy was released this week or last week. And, many of the tools or the technologies. So Ethan, you talked about ag tech being broader than just digitalisation. There's a lot in that report about maybe reducing or removing some of the tools or technologies in the toolbox, if you like, that we currently have available to us. And yet there's an increased focus on ag tech in the sense of digitalisation and so on that we've been talking about this morning. Is there a sort of a contradiction in that, or, how do they work together? How does this all fit together, if you like, in that new European strategy?
Well, we have to be very careful, because, the US and China are forging ahead. They have access to these kind of advanced technologies. And if we are operating on a global scale, which is what we are, we have to try and harness any type, the broad church of ag tech again, what's available to us to make sure that we can still compete. We produce the highest quality, output. We produce the highest yielding crops across Europe in a lot of situations. So how can we maintain that productivity, given the certain conditions that have been put forward in the Farm to Fork, And I suppose this is kind of goes back to why we started looking at digitalisation, because it was the one area that didn't seem to be causing controversy. So, how do we focus on this type of technology in order to help us optimize how we produce food? And I think we have to keep focusing on that. And, hopefully stuff that kind of happens around, the genetic side of things, that we, within that Farm to Fork, there is a capacity there. There's trials going on, and like that hasn't been shut off to us, But yeah, it's going to be very difficult. We have to try and increase our productivity. And if we're kind of playing one hand tied behind our backs, it's going to make it even worse. So again, we're focusing on what we kind of have control of, which is around the digital area.
Okay, very good. Kevin or Patrick, do you want to come in on that comment, or happy enough to leave it? No, well, I think Europe is trying to develop its own identity in terms of food production systems and wider bioeconomy, and how it manages for natural capital, and how it is trying to produce a food system for the future. And by developing technologies and industries and farmers and the consumer and the citizen within this system, that we will be selling how to do this to the world. And by being the first mover to be able to work this out. And if you think of it, Ireland is one of, there's not so many countries around the world that are developed countries and that agriculture is such a large part of its economy. And we, I suppose, have an opportunity to really develop the industry to become a leader of not only food and bio-based products all around the world, but also the services to deliver that. And that's a massive opportunity if you think about it, because in some form and in some shape, the US and China and the Asian economies will have to try and figure out how sustainability and productivity go hand in hand. And if we do it first, and Ireland is a super ecosystem to be able to do this, because end to end you can get to from a farmer to the head of the government in probably the least amount of steps of some of the most developed countries in the world. That's to be looked at as in a positive way.
Very good. Okay. Unfortunately, even though we've other questions and queries and comments that have come in, we're going to have to leave it at that.